All right, today we're jumping into some really fascinating and honestly kinda unsettling work from psychologist Eric Berne. We're talking about his concept of sexual games. So let's dive right in.
You know that feeling, when you see a relationship, or maybe you've even been in one, that just feels off. It's less like a partnership and more like some kind of contest, right? Like someone's always trying to score points or stir up drama instead of, actually connecting. Turns out that feeling is super common.
Well, this is exactly what psychologist Eric Berne was fascinated by. He came up with this pretty radical theory. He believed that sometimes sexuality has nothing, and I mean nothing, to do with actual intimacy. It's being used for something else entirely.
So, he didn't just see sexuality as being about love or desire. For him, it could also be this really powerful psychological tool, a way for people to navigate all these hidden motives and emotions in their relationships. And he gave these interactions a name: sexual games. And the whole idea is that sexuality gets repurposed. It stops being about closeness and becomes a tool for something completely different.
And this is the absolute key. When someone's playing one of these games, the goal isn't connection. No, the real prize? It's control. It's about feeling powerful, or maybe managing their own deep-seated insecurities.
Okay, so let's make this more concrete. We're going to look at a classic example that Berne wrote about, and he gave it a pretty blunt name too. He called it "Let's You and Him Fight." So, here's the setup. You might actually recognize this one. The player deliberately creates this rivalry between two other people. Then they just step back and act all innocent, right? Like, oh my gosh, I had no idea this would cause a problem. But really, deep down, they're getting a huge kick out of being the center of attention, the prize that everyone's fighting over.
And that right there is the psychological payoff. See, the game isn't actually about choosing someone. It's all about that feeling of importance, that rush you get from being in control of a whole situation, all while pretending you have nothing to do with it.
All right, let's move on to the second game. Berne called this one Perversion. Now, I know the name sounds pretty intense, but the core idea here is really about twisting the whole purpose of intimacy on its head.
In this game, one person is actively using sexuality to avoid a real emotional connection. So instead of being about vulnerability and getting closer, it becomes a weapon, a way to assert power and keep the other person at a distance.
And you can really see the difference here, right? On one hand, you've got genuine intimacy, which is all about connection and closeness. But in the perversion game, sexuality gets twisted. It's used to dominate, to humiliate, or just to build a wall so that things never ever get too emotionally close.
Okay, so we've got these two different games: Let's You and Him Fight and Perversion. They seem different on the surface, but what's the common thread here? What really ties them both together? This chart really lays it out. With Let's You and Him Fight, the tactic is creating rivalry, and the goal is feeling important. With Perversion, the tactic is all about distorting power, and the goal is to dominate or just plain avoid intimacy. You see? In both cases, sexuality is just a cover for a completely different psychological agenda. And this really gets to the heart of what Berne was saying. So often, these manipulative games come from a place of a real insecurity. Think about it. If you feel powerless, or if you're terrified of being truly vulnerable with someone, it's easy to see how sexuality could turn from a bridge into a shield, or even a weapon. It's a pretty heavy idea, right? Maybe a little uncomfortable to think about, but it leaves us with one last question, and it's a big one. What games might we be playing in our own relationships, maybe without even knowing it?